Class 2 of ODSA. Last class, we went over a lot of concepts in BI and Python. And this class, we're going to finish going through kind of the core concepts of Python, how to build programs, and get you guys set up with Jupyter, review a little bit of Slack, and everything else. So, all right. I'm going to make sure I'm sharing screen. Sure. Okay. All right, so everyone's here. There's attendance. And we will touch on Slack real quick. Okay. So do you see what I see, Ronnie?
Yep, I got it pulled up right there.
Awesome. Yeah, so it's really, in this case, under cohort 10, just a large chat stream. Okay. And so down at the bottom, you can add a comment if you want. If you want to tag somebody, you press the @ symbol, and then you've got a huge selection, and you can find their name. So you can tag me, you can tag Nate, Mara, Michael, etc. And then you can write your comment. You can paste your links just as you would everything else. And just as with email, down here you've got options to format, as well as add attachments, and then send.
If you don't have to put the food away.
Yes, yes. That works.
Anytime you get it back out, I'll just keep it nice.
Cool. Thank you much. All right.
And, maybe I'm jumping the gun, but
You're good.
the recording of the class, like, we can go back and watch Monday night's class and then tonight's class.
So Monday night's class had a lot of issues with the recording.
Okay.
This class, you definitely will. We'll be adding you to a Facebook group, which will have the YouTube recordings.
Okay,
We're just going to watch over the recording of this class to make sure that it went through correctly.
okay.
Yeah.
Throw on that, okay.
Yep. But we went through and did a preliminary test before today's class, and everything should be working very clearly now. Yep. The only thing we don't have this class is a mic to hear everybody else's questions. So if you want to be heard on here, make sure you speak up just a little more. Yeah. Yep. And then I can add other channels too if you guys feel that we're getting a bit cluttered on one channel stream. But 4 people, it shouldn't be too bad. You can also message people individually. So if you right-click on a name, you can say message Michael right here. You can copy name, copy link, view profile, etc. And it just pops up on the side. And so it's got a pretty basic hierarchy. To the left is the higher level, middle, central, and then detail on the right. Okay. Any other questions on Slack?
Was there an app on the phone for it?
There is a phone app too, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'll explore that this week.
Yeah. There's probably a number of good YouTube videos too that you can find on that.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
And the wonderful meats, which I'll have to get some. Okay. So I'm going to close that for now so it's not in the way. Okay. So to start in today's class, we're going to do a full language review. I got a bit distracted with some of the minutia here and there. But right now I'm just going to talk through this Python PowerPoint. And then we'll go over those details in some of the programs that we've been building and that maybe some of you guys have built in the spare time over the last. Okay. Sorry, not going to be able to get the full screen that I want. Okay, so what does hashtag do? Comments. What is a print statement?
Console display.
Yep, it helps you display text from the program that you're writing. And then variables. What are variables?
Registry storage, or like places to store things.
Yeah, so they're names that we give to things that we want to remember, that we want the computer to remember. Okay, so these can be numbers, they can be strings, they can be functions, they can be Boolean values, true and false, right? And we make those assignments using the equal sign. And not only can we assign values, but we can assign empty values. Okay, so in this case, this piece right here would be a completely operable or accurate Python statement. Okay, and then we get into Boolean logic. Okay, so the question mark, sadly, in Python isn't really used for much of anything.
No tertiary?
Hmm?
No tertiary?
Yes, we have tertiary, but we don't use the question mark. Yep. So, and if we have true and true, that equals what?
Results in true.
Yes. And false and false? False. What about true or false?
Still true.
Still true. Yep. So this is just a reminder, and an or. And then what does the exclamation point mean? Not Michael?
Did we go over it?
Yes.
Nice job. Yeah.
And tricky enough, I actually put the answer in my statement of not Michael. Okay. And then we can also use greater than or equal to as comparators. And we can also use those in combination with the equal sign for greater than, equal to, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And then we went over some basic operation of plus and minus. Now we'll go into some other bits and pieces, but I should actually follow the PowerPoint as it's kind of structured. Okay, so this is the first line setup, core concepts, most important part, comments, variable, print. Yep. These represent kind of the most valuable data structures that you'll use, okay? So the comments, of course, for readability, the string, lists, and dictionaries, okay? And this helps us view kind of the syntax for those. But each one of these just represents things where you can add a large number of characters or a large set of items into that grouping, okay? And so in the case of a string, we can put any number of characters in that string. In a list, we can put any number of strings or numbers or other things into that list, okay? So I can say 1, comma, A, and this right here is a list, okay? And then I can add words and paragraphs and larger complex things into this list, and it still works. And that's one of the cool things about Python in terms of lists, is they're very dynamic, they have a high utility, but a little faster, and a few different use cases other than what we have with lists are dictionaries, which, just as the name would imply, is a number of key value pairs. And the syntax generally is key value space. Let's not do that. Okay. Yeah. And within dictionaries, you can also add lists. This refers to tuples, which we'll touch on at some point in time. And then we'll go over these functions real quick. So you guys already are familiar with one function in Python, and that function is print, okay? Anytime you see a word and then parentheses after it, that is a function. And so type is the next one that we can experiment with. If I come over here in our example space, I say type, and I put in a number, and I hit enter. It tells me int. So this number is type int. If I say point something, and I hit enter, it tells me that it's a float. Anything with a dot in it, think of it as something that's floating, okay? It's got some piece under the water and some part above the water, okay? And think of that decimal as the thing that's the water line, okay? But yeah, so ints and floats. And then, of course, we know about strings, str. What other data types do we have? What is true and false? Booleans, yes. So if I hit enter on that, shift enter, I get bool, short for Boolean. And so the type function is very useful in understanding what it is we're looking at, what it is we're using. If I go ahead and I say x equals a string, okay, and I get the type of x, I now know that it's a string. If I've made so many references to what x is over time and I've lost track of this statement altogether, I can always inspect it and say, okay, this is a string. All right. So moving on. So int, float, bool, string, and what is this larger piece right here? A list, yes. Cool. Yep, so this entire piece just shows a bunch of those basic structures. This is a tuple with a list inside of it. And you notice that I refer to things that are parentheses on their own as tuples. So whenever we put items inside of a function, what does that technically make this? What are we putting the data in there as? A tuple. Yeah, sorry. Details. Okay, and then this refers to data frames, which is a important / useful tool in pandas / Python for data manipulation. We'll be getting a lot into that, so you don't even need to really reference that for the time being. Okay, so now we'll look at operators. And these up top are 3 really important math libraries for use in Python and data manipulation and production. These 2 are kind of on the basic end. NumPy can do anything that those can do, but on a much grander scale with a lot more data. So if you're trying to generate large random data sets of users or user activity or user data, this is the module, the library that you would use. Okay, so looking at some of these operators. We already know what these 2 do, plus and equals. We already know what plus equals does. This one does multiplication, division, exponentiation, okay? So if I want to do x to the power of 3, that's what I do. And then in the same way, if I want to do the square root of x, I would do x / 2. And then %, any guess what that one does? Not quite. So this would actually return you the remainder. Okay. And so very useful when trying to figure out, am I staying within certain bounds or ranges? Also figuring out if you've got a 0 or not. Okay. And then the idea of summation, okay? So I put this symbol in here, but you don't actually use that in Python. It just represents this function, okay? Which is a very useful function for various Boolean logical type things you might want to do, or just counting items, or summing sets. So if I put 23, 5, 7, quick, what is it? Yep, cool. So yeah, that's all it'll do, pretty much. And just as with math and random, there's more complex versions in NumPy. Range we have basic experience with when we were producing a loop. It helped build us a range of values, right? From 0 up until, but not including the number that we put inside these parentheses. So if I put a 10 in here, what is that set? What is the starting value and ending value that would give me? 0 to 9, yes. And what data type would that return me? It would return me a set of ints, but that set itself, if we come over here and we paste the range in here, that range itself would be a range, but when we print it, which I guess is what I should have done. Name error, oops. Range 10. Okay. Yeah, that was, okay. So with an earlier version of Python, if you had printed it just as is, it would have produced a list from 0 to 9. But in more recent versions of Python, it only produces a range, which you would have to use the list function on to transform it into said list. But yeah, so interesting differentiation. If you're ever working with, let's say, Python 2.7 versus Python 3.6, which you may with very few libraries, that'll come up. Okay. So that's sum, there's math. Okay. Next, we're looking at the comparators. So true, false, and then there's also none, which is essentially the Python's null value or nan value. Ideally, you won't be using none, but if you see it, just know that it's a data type similar to true and false, but you can't operate Boolean logic on it. Okay, so and or we can use similarly to and or. Double and double or don't look for equality. They look for exact reference point. And so they would have to reference the exact same points in memory to be operable in that way.
So maybe an analogy to that would be comparing apple to apple. It might be 2 apples, but in this case, what you guys are saying is the exact apple, not some other apple.
Yeah,
some
yeah.
other tree or same tree.
And as I'm saying this, to be very clear, I'm sorry to be very confusing. That's actually the triple equals. I was looking at the and or and or. This is just more verbose way of putting the exact same thing, actually. So and will mean the same thing, or will mean the same thing. But triple equals will check for exact equality. Okay. And then less than, greater than, equal to, etc. Okay. And then we've got a few other keywords in Python that are very useful. Is, not, any, and all. So not, of course, does the exact same thing as the exclamation point. Is works very similarly to the equal sign or the double equal sign, but you can use it in a few different ways. So if I ask the question, let's see, here it is. And can't use that shortcut. Okay, so x is 10. And I hit enter, it returns true. That's because is works similarly to double equal sign to check for that equality. But I can also ask the question, x is in 10. So in this case, I can add 5, 6, everything else. And it'll always check to make sure that it's in there. is in a different language. Okay. All right, not any all. Okay. Do people have a good idea of how these two functions might work? Any and all. Okay. So,
That's something we do every day.
yeah, that's right. So each of these would accept sets, okay? So lists, strings, but much less useful on strings, dictionaries, tuples, etc. And if I pass any a set of values such as what we have here, and I say any, do not need that in the way. Okay, there we go. And it'll say true. And that's because there does exist something in there. If I give it an empty list, however, it will return false. If I give it a false value, a 0, and an empty string, it'll also return false. That's because each of these is interpreted by Python as a 0, okay, or as empty, okay, as an empty value. And so that's a very useful tool for checking data. How many zeros do I have? And the all case, of course, if any one of these is not there, it'll return false. If I change this 0, though, to a number, it'll return true, because all of those cases fit, all of those cases match, or are above that of 0. There is a value. And so that's a very good way to check for what in Python is called like truthiness. And it's also a similar idea to the solution that I thought of for handling many conditions of yours.
Yeah.
So let's see, coming over here real quick. Okay, so this is some of the code that I threw together just to handle some of the logic for what you want. And so, of course, there's the source data. Okay, so the data he's going to be getting from weather towers or wherever he scrapes that data from, the APIs. Then we've got some other source data, but we've got derivative values. So freezing is true if temperature is under a certain level. And then I can also add burning or other various hard-coded sequences. But this also allows me to put sets together and check for multiple values at once, okay? So tornado, flood, all of these summarized as hazards. And so down here, I used the any function very usefully to denote, okay, do I have any hazards at all that I should be worried about? And if not, then make a recommendation, right? Because I'd hate to go fishing if, you know, there was going to be a flooding warning. Even if the temperature was great, even if the wind speed was okay, if there was going to be flooding, nope, etc. Okay, and then in the same way down here, I use the all function to handle multiple conditions. And these conditions, I believe I pulled just straight from the code that you gave. But this makes it much more readable and much more clear. Even though you're going to be doing extra checks, you might notice that this check right here and this check right here are the same. You can hard code certain qualities prior to that. Okay, so above 80, you might consider, let's say, warm, right? And below 100, maybe that's the range that you call warm weather, right? And so here, instead of putting temp air greater than or equal to 80, we'd put warm weather. And then we'd hard code those above just like we did freezing. And thankfully, with how fast Python operates, because it compiles down to C, which is pretty close to machine code, it runs very quickly and it won't add a lot of overhead just to predefine those. But it allows you to make a lot of different checks and read through immediately all of the recommendations that it has set. And then of course I've got an else condition for anything else, or for those hazards, that is. And then go for a walk as the last suggestion. Okay. All right, back to Python. So that's any and all, very useful functions. When you get to working with much larger data sets though, they do become burdensome and you want to use something like NumPy, which has functions that optimize speed on that. Okay, so now looking at if, elif, else, and the C in these cases are just statements. So if this, do A, elif, do B, else, do C. Anytime that you have an elif, by the way, you will have an else statement. You don't always have to have an else statement if you have an if statement, but you do have to have an else statement if you have an elif statement. Okay. So that's just the expanded form. All right, so moving on to loops. We covered while loops and for loops last class. And so while true, do A. For I in iterable, print I. Okay. And so this is the most basic syntax that you'll often see for Python for loops. If I come over here, I can actually just copy and paste that like everything else. Run it. Oh, what did I do wrong? Use this spacing off. Oh, it's because the quotation marks pulled from the PowerPoint are actually a different character. They're not actually single quotes. Yeah, yeah. And so here it just went through and iteratively printed out the iterable. And so very simple example, but very often you'll see I as kind of the base letter used, and I just means item. Okay, so for every item in the collection iterable or in the set or list that you put there, it would go through and print those off. All right. Now talking about classes, functions, methods, and attributes. So this is a bit more of an abstract set. Okay, this is where we get into more object-oriented programming. Okay, thankfully functions exist well on their own. But okay, the basic structure and syntax for these in Python is a function with variables between parentheses, and then methods operate on objects. And you also put variables between parentheses at the end. But then you can get attributes from objects. And because Python has a lot of useful tools underneath and built in, there's a lot of built-in methods on lists and attributes that you can also get from lists and other sets. All right. So defining a function. We haven't defined a function yet, but we'll be doing this today. We use the syntax def, and then the name of the function. You give it variables, and then colon, and then you perform some sort of logic with that. And you're not required to return a value, but very often with functions, you're either returning a value or you're printing something to console. You're trying to get some data back. You're trying to pass some data forward or some value forward. Oops. All right. Let's see. Function n, func times n. Hey, yes, this is actually another piece of code that can be run except for those quotation marks, which I'll fix. And for some reason it switched the spacing. But let's see if it still runs. Oh. Data rate exceeded. So I just broke Google. Not really. I just broke the rules that they gave me. So if I want to do this instead with, let's say, 15, run. Okay. Yep. Just another example of the ability to multiply strings. Yep.
So let's count the smiley face yesterday.
Yes. But yeah. But here we have kind of just a good example of the most basic of functions, where you're taking in some sort of variable and you're using that variable to modify something. And then you're also returning it. So I can pass the return value from this function into a variable. And I can say x equals function 15, and it'll still print it. Down here, if I now say x and I run it, you'll say func times n. Oh, yep, because I did that. Instead, I should do that. There we go. Yep. Makes sense? Yep. Okay, cool. Yep. So the return value is just what will always be passed through to anything you're giving it to. All right, so looking at classes now. So if we're looking at, let's say, the class of dog, we can create a function called feed. So dog.feed, and we would pass it a name. And so f equals name plus x food, return f. So in this case, what would happen? What sort of functionality are we looking at with this function?
You get like a string.
Yep. So f, you're getting a string back because the name you're giving it is, in theory, a string. In this case, we're giving it Rory. And so what would the return value be? Rory's food. Yep. And so just a kind of simple example, but it would also work. I'm going to avoid using these examples that have all the quotes for now, just because I don't want to have to go through and edit all of those. Okay. Class cat, def meow, self, print meow. So in this case, we are actually creating an object called cat. Okay, and so this is the first class that actually gets into object-oriented programming. The one just before it can still be considered in the domain of functional programming because we're just dealing with functions. Okay, this is kind of a placeholder or a category for this function. Okay, if you think about it that way. But here, because we are adding self as a value that enters the cat's meow, we can define Toby as a cat and give Toby that quality meow, and we will get meow printed out. Does that make sense? Okay. Yep. So for that same thing to happen here, we would also have to pass self to it, and we wouldn't be passing name. We'd have the name built into the function that defines that self. That's a bit more abstract. Okay. So here we're getting a bit further. We'll probably come back to this a bit later in class, just because we're getting a lot more complex here. But
Did you say we're getting all complex here? I'm just making sure we all.
You got this, right?
well, as soon as we get into what are called dunder methods, double underscore methods, then we are actually talking about things that require a lot more abstraction and understanding of how the computer is taking in information and how Python builds classes and functions. And so I try to save this for later. But hopefully using simple words like person, right? Def init, what does init mean in this case?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I think what you're saying is, who Firefox, right?
And I've been through class once, but I'm like, wow, I don't remember that this early on, but maybe I'm.
Yeah.
Patient the overview because like, I think the.
Yeah,
I think it's like so something.
I did put together this overview towards the end of class. Right now I'm just kind of trying to show it so that we've got it
Right.
kind of in the background of our mind. I'm not expecting you guys to know this by heart and this thing. So yeah, init
Sure.
in this case just means initialize. Okay, so and this will run whenever this function person is run. Okay, so it initializes self, and that self is that you, and so when we define here then self.emote equal to that, note that there's no parentheses after that, so this is an attribute. When we do u.emote, it would return a smiley face.
This would be,
Go ahead, no, go ahead.
Yep.
I was just gonna say, this is where, in my password example for my class, if I had that password of defining, initializing the
Mhm.
saved password, then wouldn't I be able to use this to cycle through and compare it to?
Not quite. So we won't actually be able to use Python to solve the problem that you had, I believe,
Okay.
because that's a very, very technical, very language-specific problem. And it's probably a very Windows-specific problem, if I had to guess.
But it was an example in that Python book that you shared with us.
So there's password management that you can do. There's encryption that you can do. But managing specific software interactions between your your Wi-Fi manager on your computer, okay, and how it interacts then with your browser to pull up specific web pages, and then how it might be defining some sort of predefined password to pass it, right? Like if you asked it to remember password,
Right.
and then it opened up the browser, and because you skipped past the password portion, it expected that it already got the password, so it was empty, and so it tried 5 times, and then it got it wrong. Those sort of technical interactions we cannot necessarily manage with Python. Yeah. All right. Sorry for the nitty-gritty there.
Okay, I was reading this, I was thinking about this,
Good.
and I get it.
Yes.
So if you,
Yes.
one of the things I think would be interesting is you do an assignment of the person object to you. You could also do the assignment of person to me or something.
Yep.
Better. But then what you I did show then is that the initialize only happens once,
Yes.
because that happens at the static level, if you will. And then when you do the emote, what you can show is that if you changed it for one object, it essentially changed it for both. That gets that right.
So not necessarily.
Okay.
So if I changed it within the class definition, it would change it for all of them. But if you change it for one person, so if like right here I say u.emote,
It is set to self, so it gets that, so that it is actually at the object level, not at the static level.
yes. Yeah. So, and I've got a few examples of classes too that we'll be going over that you can see, yeah, all that. We won't be going through all of classes today because I still want to hammer out, how to define functions, how to put together good code and refactor and how to comment. And, yeah. Okay. And so one thing that we haven't gone deeply into yet is imports, right? So once we've defined classes such as dog, cat, person, right? And maybe we've saved them in other Python scripts, okay? We can then import them essentially as modules. Like calendar, yes. No. And then in this case, I'm doing a multiple assignment, okay, which is a slightly more complex form of assignment. Let's say I want to say XY, equals 340, comma 720. Right? Maybe this is some screen resolution. Okay? This allows me to assign two variables at once in a very clear and readable way. So, just another note there. Dogfeed.rory, same examples as before. And yeah. So that's an overview of the syntax of Python. And now we will go to the applications. So, any questions / do people think that they could go through this and recognize what the different parts are and what they do?
Handful of them, yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
that
Well-
was it.
What does this represent?
Function.
Yep. So the M would be a method. Yep. If you see something dot M or something dot a name, then it's a method. If it's something dot another name, but no parentheses, then it's an attribute. Okay. And then I use P to represent loops, but just remembering the difference between while loops and for loops and range. Okay. Cool, cool. And I thought I had it up. Okay. So next what we're going to look at real quick is a bit more on the side of Jupyter Labs. So in the Google Drive folder, did everybody get good access to that? Easy access?
Google folder?
The Google Drive folder, yes.
Yeah, I requested it and I sort of did that.
Well, so I sent you viewing access, and I also sent you editing access to
Okay.
One Piece. Yep.
And I noticed it Slack just when I was opening Slack.
Okay.
and
I sent it to your Gmail.
Right. and I had Gmail, go with Gmail. You just did that earlier today?
Yeah.
Okay. Because
So
when I hit the link in Slack, because I hadn't had a chance to get into Slack.
Yep. let's see,
So-
and it shows actually Elena Huerta.
That's not
E Huerta. Okay.
eWork536@gmail.com.
Oof. I forgot a few numbers on there. Somebody else has access to this. Oops.
Okay, because I was like, I pulled up, just. to see.
Okay. All right. So E Huerta.
eWork, so EHUERT,
Okay.
V for Veronica,
V
536
536.
at Gmail.
There we go.
So now it should start. There we go.
Okay. Sweet.
So I was going to ask you for that.
Nope. All good. All good. Okay, so under concepts and tools, there's a number of folders with whether it's pictures or PDFs that you can look through. However far you want to explore on those. Don't expect to be quizzed and tested on all of this towards the end. Okay, anything that's in the main PowerPoints that I demonstrate and sort of the things that I definitely cover in class, expect that those will be on kind of an exam at the end. But yeah. Just a lot more detail and nuance if you guys want to dive into it. Intro programming, abstraction levels. You guys remember some of those? Okay. All right. Anything with an @ symbol, though, on front of it will be one of the major tools that we use. And so it's very important that you go through and explore some of that. So this one is for Jupyter Labs and IPython notebooks. It's got a number of keyboard shortcuts, okay? And so when you're working on Jupyter Labs on your browser, pulled up through Anaconda, this is what you'll use. And whenever I make code cells really quickly or I delete things, this is what I use. So if I come over to Jupyter Lab, if let's say I I hit shift enter, 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 and I've got too many of these. If I click over on the side, DD, 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 etc. That's how you get rid of cells. And so the ones that I mentioned briefly yesterday or Monday, those are all in here. Okay. Then markup. Sometimes you want to, quote, prettify or document a lot more clearly what you're doing. And so here I've put together a Python notebook that shows all of the different ways that you can add stuff. So here I've shown how you can add an image into your Python notebooks. Here you can even use special syntax to add mathematical logic, maybe a bit more than what we're going to do. But yes, this up here is the important stuff. If you double click on any of it, it'll show you the underlying markup that puts it in there. And then you just hit shift enter to get it back to where it is. Make sense? Okay.
I need to do a little administrative thing because it didn't show that way on mine, so I think I need to look up Jupyter for this editor.
Okay. Yeah, so if you don't see this symbol up in the top left, then you might have to add an app to your Google Drive.
Yeah.
Do you not see it?
I have to
It's
add
not
that.
showing, it's
It's
not
Okay.
showing like that.
Let's see. What is that called? Google Collaboratory.
So how it looks to me is it said open with Sublime on the top of the drop down. So for me, just to share,
Yep.
at the top it says open with a particular thing like Sublime.
Yep.
And then the drop down. Top box.
Yeah. Are you clicking on your desktop?
I'm using the browser to try to follow along the files.
Okay. Yeah, so if you're in Jupyter Lab, you won't be able to access it that way. If you're in Google Drive, then what you would need to do is right-click Open With and Google Collaboratory. If you don't see Google Collaboratory there, connect more apps and then search Google Collaboratory. Yes.
Working? Cool.
My neck is covered, so I'm trying to face the last straight for the
Cool.
angle at work too. So.
Yeah, no worries. You're getting that too.
I didn't realize that collaboratory is what
And because it's probably a trademarked thing, I think Google has a special way of spelling it. Collaboratory. Oh, yeah. But yeah, that just allows you to view any IPython notebooks that I or anybody else uploads in here. And of course, you can definitely download them to whatever folder you use.
So far, you're in a good spot.
Yeah, we can all, I
Nope.
download it.
Well,
No, that's all right. I was
So
just
it's-
6 feet, but I just, I need to
Yeah.
face it this
I
way.
can move my bag too.
No,
Okay.
I'm fine.
it is 6:54 right now, so we can take an early break, sort out some problems, and make sure we're set up well.
I just gonna keep turning this way to see, so I can be
Yep.
straight up, and I want to respect the social
No,
distancing too. so-
Yeah.
You're
All
good.
good.
I just want to make sure we didn't leave you behind.
Well,
Last note under student code. So I did put a few documents. One for getting weather data. So Open Weather Map API. That's what I'd recommend you experiment with next. And then some various links to explore there. And then something also for calendars and date time. And I'll be adding more as we go along, just links and references.
I just missed that collaborative piece, that's the only thing I.
Yeah.
I guess it's. So right click here. And then overlook. Then from then on, it should notes automatically open those file types with the repository. So you can just double click.
And that's the stuff that you shared with us.
Yeah, so that's the one where I showed basic work examples. This is your folder, and if you want to create a new Python notebook in here. And this is using the ePointer.
Now, it was it
Earlier. Yeah, I guess I could just access.
down here? I thought there was.
I don't think we do that.
So just to maybe take some time.
Yeah,
Okay.
I will just check back in 5-10 minutes.
Okay.
The whole way. That would be funny, wouldn't it? That's. There we go. Okay, that's the problem.
I made you the editor for a folder.
Oh, got it. So now I should be able to, so.
So I'm gonna have you do the access, so folder, I'd refresh. So then next what we can do too, you want to plug in with the HDMI and we can present what you did with your code?
Oh, sure.
So,
Do that.
I don't know. So sweet. Yeah, like something. I
You got
used to
those
be Oreo, I don't, but
Yeah, you totally can. Something in the cooler.
Yes.
Grab what you want out of the cooler.
For me, specifically, I would look around and get any last minute stuff figured out why you need to consider. Yeah. Yep. you betcha. No, I don't, we'll make, and Choritos there, yeah, no, we will be perfectly fine. No, make sure. I hear you there, girl. Alright. Alright, that sounds great, thank you, bye.
Well, it isn't going away just.
What's that?
It isn't going away just.
Well, no, I don't think just don't follow this one. Kind of sorry. Everything was just on 21. You know, figure out say they go to school too, but at the same time,
Yeah.
you know.
There's a lot of jobs in Cleveland. We gotta do things right. Because there's a lot of companies in the industry.
Well, that's a whole thing.
The best like,
Yeah, but they're like just right too. So like something little flavored.
yep, a little sugar.
If we pass this, if we grades this, then for this class, if they did this, then we're gonna start simple and see if it actually becomes.
How many people you got for transfer?
So I was planning for like doing 28, for the house of my son. Because it is a conversation that but I thought was first thing. There's my
Yeah.
So.
All the little parts of time and additional marks, the
Products and all this stuff like that. I would put on like 16 pounds of portfolio. 30 rods. Because I thought it was that like it's more like okay, for equally on even those they're gonna have
Yes.
the
Oh, yeah.
rod and something.
Yep, exactly, yep.
So yeah, so then now it's all app on like that, which certainly have to get for themselves. Which is no big deal because the voice just pops through anyway.
Yeah, we gotta work on that. Maybe like that. Let me see.
School and.
Hmm. This goes really long.
Okay, yeah. Yep.
Perfect.
I do have a truck, just some of the one that's like football games at sports. Oh, yeah. I just keep my truck.
After people have their all of that. Every year, I guess, and just go back, show you how.
I don't know, I'm the same.
I did figure out how to print a calendar. But I have yet. Well, and manipulated to an extent, but got that far.
Good.
It's been the 20s or so.
This doesn't quite seem like it's gonna work.
Yeah, I was also pretty good. You see my head. Feels like it's not,
So did Michael make his, what was the collaborative or something? Or did you have filled into Google
Oh.
Drive yet or not?
I did put code up there,
No.
yeah,
You put code up there,
yeah, so I put
but
it.
that's how we would be able to. I didn't know there was supposed to worry. But I just wanted to make, I wondered if we, because we could watch it on our screen too, or.
Oh, you,
see
yeah,
it,
you
or,
could, yeah.
uh,
Would it be interactive that way? You know, we could try that and see.
Oh, yeah.
But I think he wants to be able to record it too, so I think that's
Good point.
the
Well-
idea is,
So he watched.
One thing we can do,
yeah,
if you drag and drop it into your Google Drive folder,
yeah.
I put it in the same file. In that
Okay,
Jupyter
same
folder.
file.
Yep. And then I'll hand it each to my back.
okay, that works.
It is in your folder, Michael?
Yes, and it's called activity_recommender.
Cease to like, and of course, it's for that based on previous.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I would kind of how we eventually feed in, because that's what the math teachers did, they do that. And we've got a few kids in place, and I recognize it. You know, they're, it's 3,000 students, and everyone has double checked. Load the data in, just because we don't have all the time. Let's check the accuracy of the placement. And,
So what's gonna be interesting is, how many different recommender engines you could put on there. You could say, how do you meet requirements? You could also say, well, look at all the other classes that they're taking and comparing what other students say besides the math discipline. What kind of math classes are they taking? Those are the ones that are recommended. So that could be really cool. I mean, I really haven't thought about that. That could be, like, the kind of engagement that you're creating, plus how helpful that would be to the counselors, right?
Right, and that's what one of my math teachers just went to work at council, so it's, because we put together a PowerPoint and we had that state.
I don't know if it's on my computer, I have lots.
Yeah, I can see it.
I guess just to touch on that, then we'll jump back to this, is that, because you'll have students that get to being seniors, and they're like, I don't want to do it afterwards, right? And so that recommendation can help into that as well, so that way, it's not like all of a sudden it's just a big sort of cliff, it's like help everyone along the way, so. Okay, so, yesterday, not yesterday, Monday, I don't know if you, this was above here and it's not your fault, let's see it. But I was just trying to keep it as simple as possible, but we're also making it multiple posts. And so, but it definitely does help with, okay, here's space and here's something like that. So what I thought I would want was to say, well, how do we put multiple conditions? And so this is more condensed, so there's fewer lines. And you can see right where each principle is, and you can see on a single line all the evaluations that will take place that match with that line that gets printed out. And it essentially becomes, is everything true? And if not, then you go to the next positive. Now, at the same time, this is a little more condensed, like we're going to be in the class. There's multiple ways that we can start altering this. That's one thing that happens. So you just start defining. I really like the one that you had because it's very condensed. It uses features of the language. And so that would even make it more condensed than this. But I did walk through a couple of times in our values to make sure that it was equivalent. Looks like that was a big equivalent. And I guess you're still finishing, so I'll just say a few more things. What I don't like about this is something that they call magic numbers. So there's magic numbers all over the place in here. Because let's say I decide, well, 80 really is the right number. It's 78. All those places where it's 80 have to be changed. So in this one, we can now no longer consistent with how it works. So there are even things like that that can be done to improve this so you don't have those magic numbers shaded in your code. They don't all out there as variables. So there's a single place to change things like that.
Yep. He doesn't want to have to come through each one and be like 85, 85. Even though, of course, that's a cool animation.
And the worst thing is like, what if there's a double meaning? You can't do 95, so you just say place all 80, and now all of a sudden you change something that was speed limit for interstate versus something about a temperature. So that's part of the danger of magic numbers.
Not to mention, you might want to do more than go out on the water and go fishing or boating.
Yes.
And so once it gets to like hundreds of recommendations, you need some other system. Exactly. Cool. So very good notes, very good changes, very good sort of restructuring so that it's line by line a lot more clear. And so what he's really recommending that he do next is add, aside from a line of input lines, add predefined variables that he thinks are, this is warm weather. Wow. Camel case. This is cold weather, but it's not extreme cold. And some weather is freezing, and others, etc. So it's really good to take out parts and just modularize your code. Okay, so there's that. Okay, if then else. Okay, we talked about that. Right. Okay, and then did we want to look at your code at all, or do you want to show us how you imported a library and printed? Yes.
I do that.
Okay. Can you drag and drop that Python notebook into your folder?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So one of the things I sent her before class were, not that. Were some links regarding calendar and date time. The date time module is really good at managing the mechanics of time and calendars, but much more on the mathematical level, whereas calendar is a useful tool in representing visual and interactive sort of calendars. A lot more through command line and other things, but yeah. So a number of links there if you want to check out that. Also, we will be getting more into APIs. Ronnie might remember what APIs are, but do you both know what an API is? Yeah, so API is application program interface. And so it allows you to interface with different programs that are out there, whether that's Twitter or Google Calendar or weather apps or organizations.
How do you drag and drop in the folder?
So find the file in your file manager. So that's Finder, I guess. And then just drag and drop it directly into the browser drive space.
Over your shoulder.
I'm not doing that.
Okay, so auto save files found, so you can maybe pull up the file and put the password.
Yep.
Cover for auto save. We're gonna say over there. Is it automatically gonna recover from the auto save, or is that the button that shows me it's canceled? Or am I just not being patient?
So that's why you're doing this from.
There it
I
is.
just want to
Let's go grab some.
And this is like, you know, because I was gonna start.
Awesome. Very easy.
So
I'm like, drag and drop. Is this something you should know about?
additional business, when you build the files,
I got moved to see who that is. Obviously,
very often we'll want to.
No, that would.
I was like moving over and I'm like, it's not.
You know,
Oh my God, missing a step here.
I just want to make sure I'm
But I did it.
technically right here.
Thank
Yes, I did.
you. Okay, it's there for you.
Sweet. Oh, HTML?
Well, maybe it's not there for you. I might have saved it.
Well, that's interesting. It's giving me a preview picture of a calendar looking thing.
Yes, I did create a calendar.
So what you gave me, I believe, is the file that was produced by your Python code. Is that correct?
Possibly. Format. That. Oh, download there.
All right. And to show what she sent me real quick, I just downloaded this.
I think I did it again. Right. Oh.
Oh, you did a literal control save of the web page
Yep.
from Jupyter Lab. That's hilarious. Okay. So as you can see over
I
here,
did do it the right way.
she did do it the right way. Good. Okay.
I think so.
Yep.
Yep, I did the literal.
Okay.
So I'm gonna remove the other
So
one.
yep. So, okay. So yep, what she did up here, she did import calendar. Note she had a space after it, but didn't affect the running of it. That works. YY 2021.
How did you find that space? Just because you highlighted it?
Yeah, because when I clicked into the cell, I saw that there was an extended.
Okay.
There's also not that good.
So your month.
Yep. And then she put that into this structure. So if calendar is a module, what is month?
It's a module.
So it's actually a function from calendar, from the module calendar. Yep. Because calendar, since we didn't define it as an object, it's not an object that we're doing a method on. Okay.
Where's it getting that count from? Import?
Import calendar. So there's a set of modules that are actually built into Python because of how useful they are. And calendar is one of them. Date time is another. Short for regex, is another one of them. And that allows you to cut and parse through all kinds of text and scrape web pages. There's one called requests, which helps you download web pages and HTML and other files, etc. Yeah. So every module is a hierarchy, and there's calendar.month. But if we want to inspect all of calendar, let's say below this, I want to look at the directory of calendar. I can type dir calendar, shift enter. It's not authored by Google. New request.
You have to take that into. because it's
Run
a-
anyways.
into
Yeah,
Jupyter.
we will see. Calendar is not defined. Oh, because I did not run import myself. I've got to make sure to run the import myself. Now that it's imported, I can run this. Okay. And so in the directory of calendar, we see all of these different parts. Okay, we see fully capitalized words. We see dunder methods that I mentioned earlier. And then we see ones with underscores just before. And then we see a lot of other smaller things to find. Okay. And so each of these is either a function or a method or an attribute. Okay. And the ones that are in full caps, okay, this is normally what we use to represent constant variables.
We used that,
Yeah?
did that in
Okay.
29.
929. It's down below.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, we'll come to that. But yeah, so yeah. And you might recognize too, because of this starting bracket, this is a string. Here's a comma, string, string, string. So what is this file type that dir pulled out? Nope, it produced a list of strings. Yep. But it happens to allow us to inspect, okay, this is the inner workings of this module, okay? And then somewhat more helpful, let's say I want help. I can type help, and then this gives me a huge printout of some definitions of some of these things and some explanations for what they do and their parts and what sort of variables they take in or what sort of defaults they have for their variables. Okay.
What did you type?
Help.
Just help.
Yep. Once I scroll all the way up, you will see. Oh, I guess I got to do it over here.
Import of the calendar, it's just import calendar, no parentheses.
Yep. Import calendar, and then dir calendar or help calendar. Okay. And if I go back to dir calendar, shift enter, prints this out. Let's say I want a little more information on .month, the one that she used just a moment ago. So I'll type help, and I do .month, parentheses, up error. Do I need to remove the parentheses? Probably. Yep. Okay, format month. It takes the year, the month, and then it has week default set to 0, and L, which, not sure what that is, default set to 0, method of calendar text. You get the idea. Gives a short sentence, what that method or function is, what it does, and what the defaults are. So as it says, it does take year and it does take month. And so if you go through this and you're trying to figure out the functionality and you can't find information online, or for some reason you're disconnected from the internet, in the case of Ronnie's, you would use these to help yourself explore libraries and just come to understand them. And there have been a couple nights where I've found libraries and modules that I've just loved so much that I've just read through this, like the entire help section. And I've experimented with it all, and I built complex things, and it can get really interesting if it's well documented. Yes. Okay. So, looking a little more at her code. So that's the help. Print calendar, here it is. And then she used calendar.calendar, and she gave it these parameters, being year,
So
day, something,
I
something.
was messing around with those. I think the 216 has to do with how it's like format.
Okay. So the size and the spacing.
Yeah.
So the two, let's see, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's 6. That's the padding, at least widthwise. And then 2 lines is probably, or actually 1. That's 1 space in between vertically. And then 2, that's a good question what 2 might be.
Yeah, I was messing with it and it was doing weird things that I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, and so you can use the help method on that function to figure out what those defaults are and what those mean. And very often too, so where we put help, okay, when you see these variable names in here, okay, yes, you can put them in here just as you did, but you can also say this equals this. Okay, you can do an assignment within that. And that allows you to much more clearly say, oh, okay, this is the year that I'm giving it, and then a month. And it would operate the exact same. So shift enter, goes right ahead. And that's a little more verbose, but it's much more clear to a person who's coming through and reading it, as opposed to what you did down here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And whereas the year is obvious, you might add it to the rest of them. Okay. So yep, this one makes sense. Ah,
Yeah, I did it twice.
216.
I was messing with the numbers.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Experimentation is probably number 1 in like the long list of tools in programming that you should be applying. Experimentation, experimentation, experimentation. Okay, C
So
equals.
with this one, I was messing with, so I could change Monday to Thursday, and then we could start on Thursday.
Okay.
With Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
So if I said Thursday, ooh, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. Neat. Okay. For name and calendar, month name, print name. Good. Very good example of the simple iterable / loop.
Yeah, I could change month today.
No?
That was sweet.
All right. Cool. So that's a really good start of like, so yeah, she explored a lot. She now knows how to import modules, how to explore them, how to experiment with the different functions. And very often, so what I did send her to is I sent her various articles and YouTube videos that she could use to explore some of these things. With every module that's out there, especially the ones you're most likely to use, there's more than likely tens of videos out there, tens of articles out there. And so you're bound to find something that'll give you a good foothold to then understand the help function and the dir function so that you can then explore the rest of it. So, okay. And that actually segues well into, did you have a question there?
Oh, no, I mean, it doesn't have to be now, but I'm just curious about where I know you showed the doc, but I don't know where that doc is. I guess it's on the drive. So.
Oh yeah, so it's, right now it's under student code. I'm probably gonna rename the folder to code so that it acts as more of a general reference point. But yeah, so.
It's cool, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, the next, I put together a Python notebook. Here we go. So this touches on some of the things that I was just going over with the calendar library. So getting help, the basics. And so this just goes over kind of what I just said. Number one, you want to make sure that you're very familiar with the built-in functions in Python. Okay, so we've been over a few of them. We went over the type function, the print function, the dir function, and the help function. Okay, but there's a number of others, and I highly recommend either going to this link or looking deeper into built-in functions. Oh, geez, what did I just do? This document is under concepts and tools. Getting help. Yep. And so, yeah, you might notice on the standard library link, it's 3.6, a bit older version of Python than you probably have downloaded. We're probably at 3.8 or 9. What's that?
Open my old thing.
No, I open getting help.
So,
Open with collab.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is my guess, yeah.
Yeah. Did you have a comment?
that's it.
Gotcha. All right. But yeah, if you don't mind reading and you think you've got a good kind of basic understanding of what I've been going through with Python, the documentation for Python, really good to go through. And this is probably 3.8.
The whole thing. Type it right here, search for the amount. Yep.
Okay. So, yep. And this IPython notebook just goes through what I touched on briefly. So this is looking at the regex library, on the other hand. Hit Shift Enter, show hidden outputs.
So what does regex do again?
The what?
Regex.
So regex stands for regular expressions. And these regular expressions help you define various search functions for text that allow you to split and cut different things. So if you want to search for certain phone number formats or email formats or formats within HTML code to parse out certain paragraphs or comments or other things in web pages, regex is an extremely useful tool for helping you parse out that data. Yep. And in the same way too, sometimes you'll be working with really, really poorly constructed data, depending on the database or data source you're getting it from, and you will need regex to help modify or cut through some of that harder stuff. And next class, I will be going over web scrapers, and we will be talking about how to pull data from web pages. I will show you manually how we can do it, especially using Sublime Text. And then we will work to use regex to replicate that exact same process programmatically. So, yep. And so here I just did dir on regex and gives the same sort of thing. Okay, help documentation, you know that at this point. I do implore you to explore a bit of the regex library before next class. That'll definitely give you a good starting point. You can also use help on errors, which is a very useful feature, because then it can help explain, oh, what does that do? Why is it there? And in this case, it gave me a lot of extra stuff, but it's supposed to say that you can't divide by 0. Oh, there we go. Second argument to a division or modulo operation was 0. And so the second value must be something other. And so pretty straightforward when you know where to look. Sometimes it's a bit of digging, but very useful. Clear outputs. Okay. Reading/understanding errors. So we've already seen a couple times syntax error and name error. Okay, name error happens when what? When we haven't defined something.
Oh, I was gonna say.
Awesome. Yep. And then type error occurs normally when you try to fit a round block in a square hole, when you just put something in the wrong place, and you need to either change the type or you need to use a different function.
Like a string versus,
Yeah, exactly. And then zero division error, you know that one. And then syntax error. This one is probably just as common when starting out as name error. And you'll see that when you don't tab something, when you don't use colons, when you forget quotation marks, or you forget to get a parentheses, etc. And depending on the error handlers and the preprocessors, I forget the name of this particular part of the code, but it helps break down where the errors are and what's happening. Depending on the one that you have, you'll get a better response from this and better highlighted. Okay, Stack Overflow. Whenever I have a question and I'm looking for really good responses with details, with links, I will search on Google my question plus Python plus Stack Overflow. And I'm sorry, I keep double clicking on this. I should stop. Okay. Very often when going through the Stack Overflow Python section, you'll find interesting new ways to do stuff too, okay? And very often I've gotten code snippets from here where you can just copy and paste them, modify a few bits, and it works wonderfully, okay? The weather module, like you'll find little snippets in there that just do really cool things. Same thing for regex and everything else. Okay. Video tutorials, pros/cons. So you can explore tons and tons of information really fast if you go to YouTube. I highly recommend, if you feel you've got a good grasp of the terminology, speed it up to 1.5 or even 2x speed and try to watch a lot of videos on the exact same thing that you're looking at. Because very often between all those different videos, you'll pick up minutia from each and every one of them that you don't see in the other videos. And it's incredibly insightful. You'll feel like an expert really fast. Yep. Let's see, self-directed. Yeah, between that, and you can also self-pace your learning. Clearly, I'm here to help give you direct answers to your exact questions and help look at exactly what problems you're having. And so there's pros and cons, but you guys can read through that. Okay, so ODSA community, Slack. We're also going to have that Facebook group up and post the YouTube videos, so you'll be able to review classes. I'm going to try to come up with a quick video block to clarify when the breaks are occurring, so that when you're trying to skip ahead to different parts in the lesson, you're not wading through, okay, I don't see him on the screen. When's he coming back into the screen? Etc. Each other, yeah. How would you guys like to help each other out for coaching?
For sure.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, within the Google Drive, okay, in that first page under attendance_contact, it has all of your emails and phone numbers, except I need to modify Mrs. Huertas, V instead of A,
Yeah, 536.
536. Okay.
And that's not my phone number.
Okay.
521.
That's my.
How-
That's, you got
This
it.
is your phone number?
Right, and mine is in her spot.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's weird.
It's the 6165.
Okay.
That's
Cool.
pretty good. And then my email address is, I think there's an F, but there should be a T.
Intro wave.
Intro.
Got it. Yep. Slight dyslexia there. All right. Oh, cool. And then Ronnie,
Yes.
Did you see the question about Thursdays and Fridays?
I did.
or rather
I told her
Thursdays.
Saturday, I didn't respond or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, the question was, would Thursdays work instead of Wednesdays?
I could probably make what I can
Okay,
make work if I have to do it remotely.
okay,
Um,
I do have one Thursday, I for sure not work.
okay,
Either both in Wednesday, no.
yeah,
But that's just,
I
okay,
mean, I just have to supervise game. Wednesday's church night for school, so, you know, it's church night for others too, so it doesn't mean.
Yeah.
I'll make what I can make work, but you know, from
The-
last time, if I was.
the scheduling conflict. So in previous cohorts, we had it Mondays and Wednesdays, and then other times we had like shifted it here and there. So it was unclear when we were coming up to the classes, what days we were going to teach. And then Monday, I hear that we're teaching Mondays and Wednesdays. I happen to teach parkour normally this time on Wednesdays. And as much as I love teaching you guys, I would definitely prefer to teach like a bunch of kids parkour and awesome climbing stuff.
Yeah.
Even though it's paid a lot less. But Thursdays, I definitely can do. And so,
And so are we saying this decision is just at least for this class, and we may go back, or we're gonna do it class by class?
well, so
That's the question I was gonna ask, because this is for like 2 weeks or 4 weeks, right?
yeah, this is for 4 weeks. And so going forward, the next 3 weeks, Thursdays, if possible, would be awesome. If there's a week where both of you know that Thursday won't work, I might be able to get coverage on a Wednesday class again.
Okay, because I can make it work even if I have to be online, I mean, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I can supervise an event and be off. But I mean, it should be this first, you know, week at our month of school. There's no, Friday night I could do because we have Friday night football.
Okay.
And I haven't seen that cross country stuff doing it, so I don't know.
Right, exactly,
Mm.
yeah.
Good
But
point.
typically the cross country would be wrapping up by 6 o'clock, wouldn't it?
That's one point, I think. so.
Yeah, I mean,
It-
because I
it's
was going
fast,
to,
so,
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depending on if there's meat.
Right, but usually the meets go right after
you
school.
know, right after school, yeah, so it's
Oh,
yeah?
generally they're not really, so that's.
Okay.
Yeah, because our last day is 19th, correct?
I do not know the exact dates.
I think so,
Probably roughly, because that's like roughly 4 weeks.
yeah.
Okay, cool.
I just have.
So I will make sure to modify those attendance dates. But that looks
Except those numbers, you mean, that's the day of the week or day of the month?
Yes, day of the
Those
month.
months. Okay.
Yep.
And so the ones is the Boolean for having attended.
Yep.
All right.
There or
So are we starting next week on Thursday?
yes. Yep.
So,
So Monday, Thursday.
We can be right at point.
All right.
And then who's gonna update the calendar?
The ODSA
Yeah.
Contemporary Analysis Calendar. I'm talking with Nate tonight
Okay.
about that. I was just getting confirmation on this, and we should be able to update that.
And then if it's okay, because I know it's nice that it's
Mhm.
here and then it's in that page. But
Yes.
if that's a Google Calendar, I can just import that calendar.
Yeah.
And it'll just show automatically with my existing stuff, so I wouldn't have to go to the web page.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if there was a way of knowing what that calendar is, so we can import it, that'd be awesome for
Mm-hmm. Okay.
usability too.
Well, so do you have access to that calendar right now?
I have it through the web page, but I don't know what the calendar itself is.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I can
Okay.
import it.
Yeah, I can find where that is and send it to you guys. Otherwise, I can just as easily customize one and have those class sections so that you can even see, okay, this is what we're doing that hour, this is what we're doing that hour.
Cool.
and just, I have my final single game next week at 8 p.m.
Is it okay?
So I'll be here or I'll be online until 8, but yeah, I want my team at least not lose.
Yeah.
And then I'm available the rest of the
Okay.
week.
So it's
Cool.
Thursday next week.
Yes.
And I mean,
But other
I'm
than that,
willing to commit 5 to 8 that week if that helps.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes, yeah.
I don't know, you're usually here at 5
Yeah.
anyhow, but I mean, that
I can do
helps for the one session,
That's
I appreciate that.
you know what I mean? I just usually stay at school until, you know, start back, so if we want to.
Yeah. And we can also schedule some like random points out of class too. that might work for you guys, and then we could have a co-working session to catch up on anything that was missed, or to clarify anything that wasn't as clear on mine.
Love the flexibility.
Okay.
Awesome.
There we
Cool.
go.
Alrighty. So let's see. Getting help, Slack, everyone. Teacher. Okay, cool. So you guys know where each other's contacts are, and that works. Okay. So we all know how to get help. We all know how to explore Python and modules and ask questions of what we can do with Python, right? Cool. All right. So now we can build more stuff. So add more. Okay. 10-minute break while I find a couple things that I thought I had uploaded.
Where's that?
Rest.
That would be important. Briefly. Hmm. Okay, we are back. Okay, let's share screen. Okay. So I just started playing this song from here. And the only issue is that I can't exactly stop it unless I find the appropriate tool for that.
Can you use just a YouTube link, or did you have to use a
So I just downloaded the MP3. So right here you can see the file path for where that MP3 is. And that's how I called it. But real quick, we'll just do this on your guys' laptops so that you know how to install libraries that aren't in the Conda repository. Okay. So open up a new IPython notebook. Change this to light so you guys can see this. Okay. And then try to import play sound and see what error comes up. Well, Spider will give you the same sorts of errors. You can do this in Spider. Okay. Yeah.
It says no module name.
Yes. Yep. And that's probably the exact same error as if I try to run this line. It'll tell me there is no mixer. Maybe. Oh, nope, it won't. Because it's still running this line right here.
Yeah, the module name is not.
So what I'm going to do right now is interrupt kernel. And we should hear the music stop. Restart kernel, clear all outputs. There we go. So just as with the infinite while loop that we experimented with on Monday, if you need to interrupt things, you can come up here and try interrupt kernel. If you need to really stop everything and clear outputs, restart and clear outputs is the best one. Otherwise, this one is 00. And so if you click on the outside of something, press 00, that would do it as well.
Can I ask, underneath your second tab, there's like a square there that's all filled in
Square that's all filled in.
in black.
This one?
So notice if you go up underneath your second tab.
Oh, tab.
Down a little more. Okay, to the right. Okay, back a little bit. Is that black square?
This one.
Yeah.
Stop. Yep. So that will stop if you are, yeah. Actually, have I hit that in the past? Yes, I've had it hidden in the past. I don't normally use those buttons.
Okay.
Password stuff was here.
What's that?
My password stuff code was here on Jupyter.
Yep.
That's what I was gonna say.
Good.
It's not Spider, I went to Spider.
Yeah. And an important note with this, the stop button will interrupt kernel or try to interrupt kernel, but it won't necessarily stop it. Okay. And so when I was trying to stop the music there for a second and stop the other box that was running, the cell that was running, I tried that first. It didn't work. So then I did this. And so sometimes these buttons will work. Sometimes they won't do what you expect. As a rule of thumb, because you don't normally see visual interfaces with every coding interface, I tend to use shortcuts or I use these bits up here. Just as with Shift Enter, you want to become accustomed to what's quickest on the keyboard as opposed to always having to reach for the mouse. Okay, so if you guys all got the same error, now we're going to figure out how to install Play Sound. Okay. So what you're going to do, press the Windows key or Command Space, and then you're going to type in Anaconda. And you should get, as one of your options, Anaconda Prompt. And then you'll select that. Nope. Anaconda
Where can you have
Prompt.
us go get that, to copy of that?
What's that?
So copy of the play sounds stuff. You have to type that in or?
So the only thing you have to type to get the error is import play sound.
Okay, so I don't have to type the.
Nope, you don't have to type the rest of it.
just
Right now,
type
we're just trying to practice importing modules that are of a different source.
I do not have. Okay.
Anaconda prompt popping up.
Okay, so then in that case, we might have to come over to add, and then let's try terminal. In fact, because I normally don't use this option, I will try this option as well. Okay,
Terminal one.
and in my case, I'm going to try to do mixer because I just got a module and I found error there. Okay, so first try conda, install, and then paste or type the module that you want to install. Here it's telling me you would come over here and click on the plus, yep, and then scroll down to the bottom. Yep. In my case, I got an error. It couldn't find it on any of the current channels. And so the other option that you will try next is pip install, then type it in again. And in this case, it found it.
Oh.
How do you read this on the word install? You guys have to put PIP install mixer.
Yep, pip space install space.
But it does look different.
It does look different.
No,
Yeah.
it's because I would be.
Yeah, and then once it does return to giving you kind of the file or the current working path, current working directory, then go back to your Python notebook and rerun that line. Yeah, wait, that's weird. Let's see, download, still spotted. I'm betting this isn't with. Yep, that's an error.
It's just going up to it.
Find a module named Pygame.
Shit.
I didn't compare.
Like, so rerun the
Good.
line, though, it's back up to the line and do. That's what I should.
Yep. Yep, exactly. And then
Install mixer or play sound? Oh, wait. Were we supposed to install mixer?
play sound.
Play sound?
Yep.
Okay, I didn't import play sound, now I need to do. We don't go rerun import play sound.
If you haven't run it yet, then yes, you want to do pip install play sound. If you've already done that, then you come back to the Python notebook and you do from play sound, import play sound, or you just do import play sound.
Okay,
To
on the
test it.
terminal, I did the pip install mixer,
Okay.
okay? Then go back to. the
So
user.
do pip install play sound.
Yeah, that was-
Oh, well, that's what was up there, okay.
Sorry.
So pip install.
Yep.
Play mixer, it's the just mixer.
So don't worry about Mixer. Forget about Mixer at this point. I was doing that because I had already done the example that I want you guys to
Okay,
do.
so pip install
Play sound.
play sound.
Yes.
Then we won't get that error.
Yep. And then go out onto your computer and find a MP3 file or a music file that you'd like to play.
So this might be deep left field, but does it matter about the virtual environment? If
Um,
you do it through the Anaconda console, we'll do it in its.
yes. And so that's the thing. Thankfully, when I did this within this terminal under Jupyter Lab, it worked just fine. It seems to have connected with the Anaconda virtual environment. But if I were to, so this is a good question, you guys. So he's asking about what's called the virtual environment, okay, which is the environment or the sort of directory space in which Python is looking for things, okay? And so in this case, he's asking, does it matter where we're installing this? What environment we're installing this in? And yes, it definitely does. So what I used or asked you guys to do was use Anaconda prompt. And the reason is because Anaconda prompt knows where to install that within your Anaconda environment. Whereas if instead I came over here and I just opened a regular old command prompt and I tried to run the same command, let's say pip install play sound, I will probably get an error. Oops. And not just because I misspell it. But in this case, because pip is not recognized as an internal or external command. Yeah. So aside from that, there are ways to define further virtual environments. So technically what I just described was the base environment for Python within Anaconda. But sometimes you might want to run a program that is specific to Python 2.7 because you're relying on an old module or set of modules. And sometimes you might want an environment for a very, very specific type of Python, let's say version 3.6, 3.7, any one of those, because of some minor difference. You can manage those environments using whether it's pip env or a few other environment managers. Conda has a really good environment manager. I'll post a PDF in the resources package on that since you're interested in that. Also, sometimes you will want to only install a specific set of modules and libraries for a specific project. Because Anaconda as an environment is a lot. It's got tons of libraries, tons of modules, but when you're trying to share things, share projects, and share tools with others, maybe you only want to share a portion, right? And so that's where the different environments or virtual environments come up.
So when I found where to run the Anaconda console from the launcher.
Good.
So I don't know if we want to share it or not, but what you do, and I can display it here, but on the left-hand side of the ID.
It's probably gonna tell
Yeah,
me
you
it's
start
already
with
up.
the Anaconda app here.
Yeah, it's probably gonna tell me it's already running.
Oh, the reference.
And then,
Oh, there it
yeah,
is.
you click on environment, and then your environment on your left.
Yep.
And then there was a green arrow that says root.
Yep.
You click on that, you give your options, and one of them is the terminal.
Nice. Yep.
Oh, the terminal. Is that right?
Right, correct,
Yep.
correct, correct. And then that's where you can put in the pip, that handles that virtual environment.
Nice.
You're talking about.
Yep.
Well,
So-
question, but kind statement. So I did the import play sound, and I got everything. It doesn't say error, but it says play sound is relying on a Python subprocess.
Is it giving you a warning or an error? Okay. Yeah. So it's probably just a warning.
Okay.
If it didn't break and tell you this doesn't work,
Yeah.
then you're probably okay for the time being.
Okay.
And this is another case where those environments are kind of important, or at least knowing the version of different things is important. Because, well, actually, that's kind of weird that you're getting that error and I didn't get that error or that warning.
Yeah.
I want to look at that later, but yeah,
Yeah,
because
it's saying to install different things.
yep, yep. And then I would try to go and pip install those.
Okay.
Yep. Try Conda install first every time because Conda is the Python package manager for Anaconda, but pip is kind of the general Python community package manager.
Okay.
And so pip will work with Anaconda, but Conda is better set.
Conda install.
Yes.
So once we import play sound, we have to do from play sound.
Import play sound. Yep. this is one of those cases where it was a module or library built by just kind of your average person, and they put a class named PlaySound inside the module PlaySound. And so what we're doing is we're actually importing playsound.py, and from playsound.py, we are importing the class PlaySound, which has the functionality inside of it.
And now you say we have to go find a.
Yep, and that portion is totally optional. All
It went away.
sweet. Yeah, so that's totally optional. You can do that after class or at home. You've got the entire weekend, whenever. But yeah, so just a simple case of how you can run a Python program, Python script, and that'll do something. So real quick, if I actually want to run this from my computer, okay, I don't want to have to open up Anaconda and open up Jupyter Lab. There's a very easy way to do this. I just copy, and let's say, nope. Let's do a new Python file. Do I have an option there? Yeah, let's do text file. Control-Shift-Save, .py, play sound. And remove that. Okay. So now that that's there, if I want to go ahead and play that, bless you. Hold it. Python sound. So right now I've got it set to open Python files with Sublime Text. But if I want to open it with something else, I go here to specify, look for another on this PC, and then I would go specifically into my Anaconda directory. And so that's program files, but it's likely under user, can, continue. Finding Python. There we go. Okay, so it looks like Windows has a lot of Pythons defined, but there we go. So under your user and Anaconda 3, you should have pythonw.exe and python.exe. Either of those should work to run it, but I'm going to use python.exe for now. If it takes it. That should be running. So it might be closing out because of how fast. That would be async. Maybe async. So I'm going to try one thing. Save. 50. Save. Okay. So I guess it does need Python W. There we go. Okay. Okay. And so the trick with this is we do not have some kind of box that came up with it, right? So I opened it and it just ran. And so it's just running in the background. How would I go about closing this? Does anybody know?
Start playing this.
Yeah, so I just double click this now and it'll play. But what do I have to do to close it?
Kill the process. There,
Yeah, technically you'd have to kill the process, yeah. Because there's nothing else to interact with here. Unless there was something on here that would allow me to stop. So one important valuable skill, I'll just mute that for the second, is to be able to look at what's running and know how to close stuff. Now, there's kind of a secondary problem here because I've got Python running in the background with Anaconda, and I've got Python running with what I just started. It would be kind of hard to differentiate between these, wouldn't it? No.
Right.
And so I could guess because of memory, or I could try to add something else. If I click, happens, command line, there we go. So command line will give you a lot more information concerning whatever is running. And with this, let's see, first one, here we go, sound.py. And I just jumped through a lot at once. I didn't exactly stop to show you guys so you can follow along. But to get to this point, for Windows, it's Control-Shift-Escape. So kind of like Control-Shift-Delete, and then clicking on Task Manager, but Control-Shift-Escape. For Mac, is it Command-Shift-Escape? I believe it's a very similar command set. To bring up Task Manager or the Process Manager.
Yeah. I don't remember how to bring control like that. I know it's just go to Spotlight.
Okay. Yeah, Spotlight's pretty quick too. So, but yep. So go there. Try to make sure that you know how to access this command line piece. And for that, Ronnie, I did just right-click at the top by the titles, and I selected command line. Yep.
Ours is called activity.
Yours is called what?
Activity monitor.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Terminal, I'm like, oh. Okay. Yep, and then just right-click, end task. And if I unmute now, yeah. So a little faster sound. Well, that's funny, it's not restarting immediately.
Go back to the open list, all the navigate that thing again.
Shouldn't have to because it should remember it by default now. Okay. Yep. So there we go. So that's very important to know for more than a couple reasons. Okay. Sometimes when you go through and you look through your task manager, you won't even have Anaconda running, but you'll have Python running for some reason. And sometimes that's because a specific program is using that. Okay. For example, we might have, where is it? Oh, never mind. So normally Sublime Text has some use of Python. In the past, it was based almost entirely on Python, but I do not see anything running that right now. But other times you might have a virus, or you might have a program or a script that you started running a long time ago that just kept running and you completely forgot about it. And so it's important to know how to go in there and shut things down. All right, back to this. So we know imports, we know how to install modules, get things that we don't have. We've talked about typing. Let's see. Okay. Next, we will touch on
Can you go back and show how you save that as sound.py?
Yeah. So if you just right click at the top,
Uh-huh.
rename Python file or rename file, then you can modify the extension and name.
And that's even for the untitled ones, to name them, you have to rename them,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, this one, rename notebook. Okay. Wrong button. Okay. So next I'll go through a couple other modules and different functionality. That's. Sorry guys. I use a shortcut to close tabs. And because I think of these as tabs, whenever I want to close one, I accidentally close the Chrome tab. Okay. Oh. So somebody had made a video about how using certain things on the internet was no longer anonymous because they could analyze how you typed on the keyboard. And so I threw together this 6-line script that allows you to type things online, but with randomly timed keys so that no JavaScript could infer who you might be based on the time between which you type, let's say, O and O, or T and I, or any of those different things, right? And so just a random example of how when you have a problem, you can find a pretty elegant solution if you just look around a bit. But anyways, what I wanted to show, oh, that's the problem. Okay. Sorry, I thought that this was the random module and that this was my example for the random module. Okay. So last thing we'll do in class is this, and then personal projects we will discuss. So based on what we've done so far, do we feel that we have an understanding of how to read this set of Python?
Take me a minute, I'll figure it out.
Yeah. Okay. So do we remember what NumPy is? Yes. And then pandas is something that allows us to build data structures. You might remember me mentioning data frames. Data frames are Python's really, really fast and quick data structures that allow it to process a lot of data. NumPy processes data very linearly, but pandas processes data in, let's say, spreadsheets or multi-dimensional spreadsheets. And then import provider. This is just a tool to help provide fake people names. So Hopefully you're commenting code to explain what different functions do. Keep in mind that each of these functions is very well isolated. So this function generates random names, random genders, then random dates. And then down here, we put all that functionality together. Normally what you do within Python programs is outside of the imports, you then have the variable definitions, right? So it would normally have that right about there. Then define the functions, key functions, and then from those, you would then build your main logic set, okay? And so from this main logic set, normally we do def main, have that up, and then say main, just to make it clear that this is the core logic. Size, because that's a variable, I'll go ahead and put that. Not let me cut. Right. I'll put that in here. It's a predefined variable. Yeah. So, make sense why I just did that? Okay. Yeah. So, Michael recognizes main from Java and other languages, but main is just a simple way of saying this is the main function that is called. And so when we run this program, okay, these imports occur, this function is defined, but nothing from it runs. This function is defined, this function is defined, this entire main function is defined, but then main is called, and then it starts here and goes through line by line and does callbacks. So that's the general order of operation. Okay. So with that in mind now, I want everyone to start a new IPython notebook. Yep, new IPython notebook or Jupyter Lab.
So when you launch Jupyter Lab,
Yep.
like I know I have it open already, I can navigate to it from the, do I always have to go to the Anaconda navigator? to-
No, if you know it's already open, then go to Chrome or your web browser.
Okay, it's in the web browser, okay.
Yep.
Got it. Yep. All right, that's what I was saying. I can't find it.
Yeah,
Okay. And so that's where I'm gonna do a new one.
Yep.
And-
Just click the add and new notebook. I'll join you guys on that.
Okay, that's it.
And so, and then create a bunch of new blocks, right? And then start to outline it. Say imports, variables, simple functions.
Yes.
Here we go. Okay. And then on the top one, just above it, press the letter A if you need to add a space above.
Press the letter A. Just A.
Yes, once you click to the side.
Oh, the box.
Yep, outside of it.
And then, once you press the box, do what?
Then in that top box, start to write the description of a passion project. Okay, so I've shown you a variety of things that Python can do. I've suggested a variety more of the things that Python can do. Okay, now I want you guys to think of what specific thing you'd be interested in using it for. Okay, so whether that's building, a small little app that you use, whether that's building something that automates alarms or schedules or talks to you. Last year, for fun, I built a Python program that would remind us to go on breaks at specific times and would talk to us in a voice that would try to kick us out if we were here 30 minutes past the end of class. So yeah, you can do something with APIs, whether that's social media or productivity related. Any app that you have that you use a ton, it very likely has some sort of API that you can use with it.
Is that complex with a T on command?
Yes, it is with its E on the end. You are very correct.
Yes.
Good catch. But yeah, so I'll give you guys 5 minutes to brainstorm. How about in that top box for now? You just write out as many ideas as you can think of. Okay? 5 minutes to write as many ideas as you can think of, and the person who has the greatest number of ideas, they win the secret prize. All right. You ready? How many ideas do we have? 2, 5, 7. Ooh.
There you go. Nice.
Running
I
lines.
don't know if they're all possible. I found, but I've got ideas.
Sometimes I feel like we're playing pitch.
So, So number one, I'm kind of disappointed in the low number.
I started thinking too much about that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was like
It's
thinking about
like-
what it would be, and then I was like, wait.
No. So do you guys understand? Well, okay. So there's a lot of different dynamic mind tools that you can use. Okay, and one of the most valuable is brainstorming, like actual brainstorming. You can brainstorm along a very, very specific path, but the true idea of a brainstorm, aside from, let's say, a tornado path gouging out a very focused, powerful line, is random spouts of water and thunder and lightning and bolts of inspiration, right? Your goal is to come up with as many as possible, okay? Doesn't matter how good it is, doesn't matter how many fires it causes, how much water floods here and there. The goal is to get as much as possible. And so that's the idea of a brainstorm in its realist form, okay? And the reason is, goes hand in hand with an idea. Have any of you ever heard of the Potter's story, the pottery teacher?
I think so.
Yeah. That's okay.
Yeah.
So this is one of my favorite stories, and it's about a teacher who took his pottery class and he divided it in half. He said, okay, for the rest of this semester, your goal is to build the most perfect pot. Okay, the just embodiments of perfection. Okay, and the other half of the class, he said, okay, your goal is to produce as many pots as possible. Okay, I don't care how you do it. I don't care what you got to get. Okay, do it. And at the end of the semester, the people churning out tens and hundreds of pots. Turns out, the ones they had by the end of that semester, billions of times better than the ones who focused very intently on perfecting that one pot. Okay? And so as you're sitting there thinking very intently about that one idea, the surprising thing is, all of that time that you put into that one idea, you could have thought of maybe hundreds of ideas that then 5 of them mix together into something so amazingly unique that it blows that other idea out of the water. Okay? And so do pay attention to when you are hyperfixating on quantity over quality, or quality over quantity and vice versa, yes. So important note there. But since there are so few, let's hear them. Starting with the 2.
Oh, okay. My first one was a phone usage alarm that, at each hour, I would get a notification being like, get off of that when you've already been on for an hour, by 9 o'clock in the morning or something stupid. So that was my first idea, and then my second idea, where I was thinking too much about, was a mindful activity generator that's dependent of the time of day, the day of the week, weather. So if it was 80 degrees out, it was a Saturday, and it was at 8 in the morning or something like that. Go slow, Or if it was winter and it was a Monday night, it would be a career. So we could do things more mindful, depending on anything. It was nice.
Yeah.
Cool. So those are my favorites.
Cool.
Right, so I had contract timekeeping, 2 task tracker across multiple sites like the website, Coursera, Schools Labs, Skills, etc. Machine learning for passive income, integrating smoker sensors for Google Nest feature that use machine learning on smoke diet.
Okay.
kind of educational information, but.
That's all good.
So that math course recommended based on what we're doing today and your, script or whatever. And I have the flow chart of exactly what we worked through today, so it's.
Very cool. Okay.
So I want to build off the teachers provided a GPA calculator, because kids are always trying to, how the kids get on their GPA and, calculator. Tardy attendance tracker, we tell kids what they're, how to own data. Sports study, so the batting average, that's calculator. Metric rate converter, and like some power or so, constantly downloading the app on how we can make it very specific power, because I'm used to the power purchase for so,
Mhm.
and then money exchange calculator, and then intervention response, we do voice down training or whatever, and so if we're training on new staff comes back, there's positive ways to provide the feedback and intervention with kids, but remember it all, or we got all these cards, or you just had that quick pull app on your phone that, okay, this code that they're kind of violating, how do you do that intervention? Here, just to, again, help with our back to school training.
Yeah.
Code of conduct stuff, and onto that would be kind of a quick code of conduct, flip chart. But we don't carry it around, it's all online, but you can't quickly grab it, but
Yep.
it's just.
Cool. All right. So, of these, which are too simple?
The converters.
Converters. Yep.
It's that, yeah.
Okay. So then, let's see. API integration. Yep. That sounded like it was going to be a lot of work. Sounds like you've got a lot of to-do apps.
Oh, yep, we're not really solid.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, contract timekeeping. There's some good ones on that. I was actually experimenting with something like that the other day, where it would just pop up and ask me what I did the last half hour and what I plan to do the next half hour. It was more of a mental, what's the word, mindfulness exercise. But yeah. And then phone usage alarm. I like that. You could also get it to text you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even when you're on
Yep.
So,
It's like, oh, I got a text.
yeah, and then you're like, from myself.
Yeah. And what's good about that too is that it wouldn't draw attention to your phone unless you were already paying attention to it in ways that maybe you shouldn't.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Huh. Okay. So thinking about ways in which we can do these different things. Okay. So phone usage alarm, email to text, API of sorts, activity generator. So very similar to what Michael's been working on, contract timekeeping. So time modules. Is this something that you would have on your computer?
It'd be nice to have it where, because you could always extend it from just timekeeping to mileage.
Yeah.
Keep track of your mileage. So, there are some out there, but they're ones that look good are surprisingly very expensive. Or maybe not terribly surprising, but I don't want to get that much.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay, let's see. Last things. Total attendance record. I'm gonna delete that one for right now, and GPA calc, dimension response frame. Yeah. Okay. So each of these that you've got right here, other than the ones that I deleted, sorry, are primary like if this then that flowchart type things. And so, yeah, we can definitely work through that. And yeah, starting here might be the best because it's simpler. And then it could work as a good model if you perfect that well enough to build onto this.
Like I said, I've got the 9 PowerPoint slides.
Yep.
If you start in pre-algebra with this, if you're dual language this, if you're with flowcharts.
Yep. And then you're wanting to work with machine learning, it sounds like.
Yeah, I don't know if this is like exfoliates or not, because some of the stuff, like even like the smoker sensing, you know, there's different specialized hardware, and so it's open source, so that makes it easier when it's open source. But still, it's a matter of getting the sensors and how often you're going to use a smoker.
Yeah.
So,
If I think I actually know the sensors that you're talking about. And yeah, I was looking at that as something to buy and just like contribute to that open source. Like, is it the air quality sensor open source?
multiple things. So it would be humidity, ambient temperature.
Yep.
How long is it going?
Yeah.
What's the humidity inside the grill? So just all those kind of things. So trying to figure out what is sort of the next tweak that you can make to have a better outcome.
Yep. Cool. Yeah. So, but yeah, that would be time extensive because of ordering and yeah. Okay. So those are sadly not doable. To do API integration.
Yeah, this was kind of like keeping track of, like, let's say you have a bunch of different interests, and so you have a bunch of different sites that have courses, keeping track of how you're progressing all those, like,
Okay.
like are you gonna actively say, hey, that goes on pause, and not actively go for this here? Because they have things where you can engage your calendar, but it's not, it makes sense why they're integrated that way. That's very, that's a feature that you get done quickly, right?
Mhm.
But in terms of, there's no feedback to it to say, no, I changed my mind, I changed priorities or whatever. So, but that was definitely a lot. There's a lot of moving parts there.
Yep, definitely. So for now, starting with the contract timekeeping, which because timekeeping and those time-related functionalities will build towards the to-do list stuff and the time management stuff. Probably a good place to start. So let's see. All right. So Ronnie, further outline math course recommender so that we could start to break it down algorithmically.
And then, sorry, just
You're-
so the one that I think they've got kind of just swooshed in there is that the passive income one. It doesn't have to start out with machine learning. The passive income one, you can even start with trading tickers. You can start to look at hey, there's
Okay.
something there that we can pick up or to start.
Got it. So
I can't hear the
Oh,
conversation.
Stock-
Yeah, so the passive income, the idea behind that is, or in terms of a project
Okay.
that we do start to is that
Good.
we can scrape sites like whatever, and not just get that, but then get what's the exit and all those kind of things, and then see if you can tease out. Some people jump drink. Take it off. Some people are like, look, I don't ever play this. So, which one makes sense, right? Since it's like something. Especially if you buy it really low, because you can hear talking to the small job.
I think that's group
When-
project.
Well, so- So you might remember from my intro slide that I've worked with financial data a good amount. So yeah, we can definitely work on that. towards the end of her cohort, I believe we also did some basic financial analysis, but we scraped Yahoo Finance data in the very same way. Yeah. I can also give you a lot of starter videos in that direction. Have you heard of CentDex?
It kind of sounds familiar, but
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay. I will send you his material, and you will nerd out over that stuff probably. Okay. So phone usage alarm. So starting with that API, that sounds great. And then even building it into an activity generator, because once you've got this functionality, then you can run this from your computer and have it send you activity recommendations
Yeah,
instead of,
instead.
yes.
Maybe before installing.
Cool. All right. So sounds like we've got some good projects. In the last 7 minutes, let's do some like outlining of what those projects would look like. And so that's why I had us very deliberately start here, right? So for the imports, I want you guys to research what modules will help you achieve these goals, okay? I could throw modules at you that would very easily help you, but I want to see what you guys come up with, okay? I'm going to grab that list. Anybody have any questions? Need help figuring out how to find what you're looking for? Okay. When I first started texting my phone with Python, I actually used email because there happens to be this thing where every phone number has an email counterpart. If you know your service provider, then you can figure out what your phone's email is. And then you can send text messages to that email from Python.
Is there like a timer or a time?
Yep, there's a time module.
Time module?
Yep.
Would that be like the right one to use or something like this, or would it have more like is there like an alarm? Or no, because it would be. We are measuring time. But-
No. So time and date time are both built-in modules. If there's built-in modules I can recommend, I'll definitely recommend them. Other ones, I want to see what you guys come up with first. So, and I'm actually interested in the anomaly detection. I might do that as a project myself, partly because it has a lot to do with cybersecurity. And so might be interested in details on that.
There's a lot of ways you can go just inside or even outside, right? So
Yep.
my mesh router, we're sending emails and things connected this, which is interesting because there's something that people connect. I'm like, I don't recognize that. But I'm surprised how much stuff is connecting and disconnecting. And on a regular level, some stuff makes sense, like the video photo. But I've got a NAS that's connecting and disconnecting. That hasn't before, so it says, okay, it's doing something wrong with NAS or worse.
Yeah. Okay. So you're talking mostly for home network type stuff.
Well, home network is one as the simpler. It should be a lot more predictable. It should be a lot less noise. It should be a lot less amendments. But I'm actually interested in using this on hosted sites, externally hosted sites,
Okay.
because like even if I just put a web browser or some version of web browser like Nginx or whatever, there's some stuff that I'm not intending anything after a important thing. I don't know what it was called. Resilio. They have a Resilio run, right? I'm not expecting anybody to be doing anything with my Resilio keys, right? So if there's anything that's even around that's not something that I want people understanding what's happening. So, actually, that's actually where I find it valuable.
Yeah.
The intra, the class C could be a better like testing ground to make sure that there's nothing that's surprising.
Cool. All right. And since we've reached an open period, I'm going to close the recording.